I want to welcome everyone tonight to our webinar. We're going to be talking about ways to keep your brain sharp, and tonight we'll be focusing, as you'll hear, on some nutrition and on toxins. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping notes. One is that everyone will be muted during the presentation. We encourage you to put your questions in the chat box, and they will be taken at the end of the presentation. And we will be recording the webinar, and the link will be sent out a few days after. So anyone who's registered will receive that link, so you can listen to it again. And we will have another webinar next Thursday on some different topics that cause memory loss. So if you go to our website, sharpagain.org, and we will put that up later in the presentation, you will get information and be able to register there. So I'm Lisa Feiner, and Nancy Weiser is joining me tonight for the presentation. And before we actually go to the formal presentation, we'd like to ask you all a few questions. The first one is, how many of you know someone who either has dementia or has dementia in their family? Let's see just a show of hands. Yeah, I think most people. Mm-hmm.
And how many of you are worried about your own cognition?
And finally, how many of you think there is something that you can do to prevent or actually treat memory loss and potentially even reverse it? So usually fewer hands go up. And so what we say to that is, we hope that this presentation will begin to change your mind about that. So we are very excited to be here with you, and I'm going to share my screen and our presentation tonight.
Hi, everybody. Everyone can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. So welcome. This is Sharp Again Naturally. And tonight we're going to talk about how to sharpen your mind using what we call brain boosting nutrition and avoiding toxins. I'm Nancy Weiser, and you just heard from Lisa Feiner, and we'll tell you a little bit about what we do right now. So who are we? We are nationally board certified health and wellness coaches. Lisa and I sat for a big long exam to become that. We are both board members of Sharp Again Naturally. Lisa is the chair, and I'm proud to be the vice chair. I am founder of Weiser Choices health coaching practice in Mamaroneck, New York, and I've been doing this for about 16 years. I specialize in preventing and managing chronic disease, and this can include everything from weight to your biometric readings. Maybe you got a reading or a result your doctor is not so happy about, or you're not quite so happy about, energy levels, digestion, sleep, and of course what we're talking about tonight, cognitive health. And
I am one of the founders of Sharp Again Naturally. We're about 8 years old now, and I have also been a health coach for 19 years. And at the same time, during these last 19 or 20 years, I've also been on the board of a nursing and rehabilitation facility in Manhattan and Westchester, and have firsthand experience with elders, those with dementia. And it's really how Sharp Again got founded, because many of us were holistic practitioners, and we heard that there actually were causes of memory loss. It made so much sense given the rise in the numbers of people who've been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease.
So just a reminder, Lisa and I are health coaches, and we do not give medical advice. That's between you and your doctor. So who are we? We are a 501c3, a unique nonprofit that educates the public and the medical community about preventing dementia and improving brain health. We try to empower everyone to take charge of their cognitive health as well as their general well-being. We support people to make lifestyle changes that can improve cognition and, as Lisa mentioned, may slow or reverse memory loss using a scientifically based multi-therapeutic approach. We already mentioned two of the therapies, nutrition and toxins, all to do that for you. We partner with like-minded professionals and organizations to broaden both our reach and deepen our understanding of memory loss and its causes. We work with our Medical and Dental Advisory Board, what we call our MDAB for short. And with our Medical and Dental Advisory Board, we've identified 10 primary causes of memory loss, and Lisa's going to explain what those are. Then we're going to focus on nutrition and toxins as 2 of those causes. And embedded in our 10 causes, there are 2 more, so it's really like 12 or 13, you'll see, but 10 sounds a little more catchy. Then we'll focus on nutrition and toxins, and we'll focus on some of the other causes in future webinars. So this is kind of like a little whet your appetite tonight, and we hope you'll join us for the rest of the series coming up in a few weeks. And then we'll learn strategies to maintain a healthy brain for life, and give you a few tips, and maybe you can go home and make some, everyone already is home, excuse me. Maybe you can go to your kitchen tonight and make a few changes right now after hearing what we're about to say. So there are a lot of statistics out there. There's a lot of numbers being thrown around, but we found this one to be the most striking and the most important one to know. There are currently 5.8 million Americans living with Alzheimer's, but that number is projected to more than double in the next 30 years. So this is what we think is the number to know. And the impact on family members, the employers of the family members, the financial health of these families is just exponential. And now I'm going to turn it over to Lisa.
So we'd like to start, I know many of you probably know the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia, but for those people who don't, we're just going to quickly define them. Dementia is a large umbrella term that really refers to a progressive decline of memory and cognition and can have many different causes. So some of these, the way that you'll notice them is that you might have long and or short-term memory recall problems. You might find that you can't plan or have as good executive functioning skills as you once did. Problem solving becomes a problem. And there are issues often with judgment. So these are just some of the kinds of things and symptoms that you might see. So that's the general category. And within that, there are different types of dementia. And some of these are listed here below. So vascular dementia is often caused by one large stroke, or can be a lot of smaller strokes called TIAs. And they affect the blood circulation in the brain. Lewy body dementia is a type of dementia where Lewy bodies, these small bodies, they're dark. They can be seen on the slides of brain tissue. Frontotemporal dementia is in this, your frontal cortex here. And this type of dementia is a very rapidly, it leads to rapid decline. And then Alzheimer's disease, which, most of us have heard of and know more intimately than we would like. It's said to be 70% of all cases of dementia. So we talked about the types, but then how does this, manifest? How is this experienced? First, typically, people feel like there's something not quite right. And most of us will notice this ourselves. You used to be able to remember people's faces or names, and suddenly you're not able to do that anymore. Or you might be traveling down roads or places that you should know, but then sometimes things don't always look familiar. We call that subjective cognitive impairment. And what we're going to tell you tonight is that would be the time to seek help, is as soon as possible. That progresses to mild cognitive impairment, where there might be symptoms, but people are still very functional and really still able, for the most part, to do the things that they've always done. They may need a little help. They may need a little wayfinding. Maybe they'll put up some stickies around their house to remind them of things, but basically they're still pretty functional. When it progresses to moderate cognitive impairment, people have difficulty with what we call their activities of daily living or daily tasks. This might be things like showering on their own, sometimes eating, but that's usually a little bit later. It's things like perhaps getting dressed or dressing yourself the way you would have dressed yourself before you had cognitive impairment. So it's these activities of daily life. And then finally, severe cognitive impairment is when you would need 24/7 constant supervision. You really cannot be left alone. So the face of dementia, who gets dementia? Everyone gets dementia. It really does not discriminate based on your socioeconomic status, your gender, your race. I mean, it's more women are said to get it, but many times it's because they're caregivers. And if you look down to the third leaf there, you'll see that caregivers are 6 times more likely to get dementia themselves. Often that's because they're living a lifestyle very similar to the person with dementia. They may not be able to exercise, or their sleep may be disrupted. You'll hear about some of these other things. Dementia happens over many, many years, often decades. So there may not seem to be a lot of motivation to take care of your brain now. We are encouraging you to do that so that it never leads to actual cognitive impairment. And lifestyle, genes, and environment, they all play a role. And we will talk a little bit about that as we go forward. But what we will tell you right off the bat is that your lifestyle and the way you lead your life can trump your genes. So the epigenetics, that's called epigenetics, can trump genetics. So I have some good news that I'd like to tell you about. Nancy mentioned that we are a research-based organization, and mild to moderate cognitive impairment has been shown to be treatable. One of the first study that came out was only 10 people. It was privately funded, but there was a 90% success rate when using a multi-therapeutic approach that Nancy talked about. So it wasn't one pill treating one thing, but it was looking at several different things at once. And together, they were able to improve cognition. And there have been other studies as well. And this model is being replicated now in upwards of 15 countries. There's recruiting going on for these kinds of trials and research. So what if you don't take precautions and you can't prevent it, but you are noticing that there might be symptoms? If you're diagnosed even with mild cognitive impairment, that would be the earliest you can get help will provide the best outcomes. So once people waited because there was nothing you can do and you wanted to cover it up and hide it for as long as possible. And today we're suggesting the opposite. Get help as soon as you know there's an issue. We talked a little bit about genetics a minute ago. The ApoE4 gene, you get one from your mother and one from your father. This is considered the Alzheimer's gene. 1, ApoE4 definitely increases your risk, and 2, increases it even more, but it is not by itself predictive of dementia. And there are people who know they have these genetics and who are actively taking steps and are successfully either preventing or delaying for many, many years any signs of cognitive impairment. And finally, Start now. Prevention is the best treatment. So I'm going to go through the 10 causes that Nancy had mentioned that Sharp again and our advisory board has identified. Nutritional imbalances and deficiencies are ones that we're going to go into in detail, as well as toxins. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that. The effects of prescription medications and side effects and interactions, all of those things. Now, more information on all of these can be found on our website. So, and this webinar is really to talk about nutrition and toxins. So I'm just going to mention these, and you can look further if you're interested. Heavy metal toxicity, I mean, that includes things like mercury, lead, arsenic, and other heavy metals. Hormonal imbalances. These are everything from the gender hormones like estrogen and testosterone and progesterone to thyroid. Could even be human growth hormone at low levels can have an impact on our brain. So many different kinds of hormones, including cortisol, which is the stress hormone. Low-level infections. These could be oral infections in your mouth. Many infections go undetected. So everything I'm talking about here, you may or may not have symptoms for. Lyme's disease, mold toxicity, food sensitivities, and urinary tract infections. Inadequate physical activity, mental stimulation, and social interaction. We've all heard about these, I'm sure, and we call these the lifestyle causes. It's amazing with just a little intervention and improvement in these areas, how much better our brains can function. Prolonged stress. So this is the kind of stress that is unabating, where we're keeping our body in that constant fight or flight, place. And unfortunately, our very hectic and stressful lives, this is more common today than ever before. Sleep and breathing issues. Sleep could be sleep apnea, where people wake up a lot during the night, so their brains are not getting that deep sleep and aren't able to detoxify. Breathing issues. Sometimes people have a narrowed airway, or if they have asthma, they're not perhaps getting enough oxygen to the brain. And physical and emotional trauma. So this could include, as you would imagine, traumatic brain injury, post-traumatic stress syndrome, but also emotional trauma, trauma that begins in childhood, could be physical or emotional abuse. All of these things lead to memory issues in midlife and dementia later in life if they're not treated. So now Nancy is going to start talking about nutrition.
Thank you, Lisa. So yeah, the addressable causes of dementia. The first one we talk about is nutritional deficiencies and imbalances. We're going to talk about how specifically nutrition affects the brain. So I am going to get specific, so put on your thinking caps. So first of all, it's kind of easy to divide the world into good and bad. So I'm going to talk about what I call good nutrition and what it can do for your brain, and then poor nutrition. So good nutrition provides energy. I think we all know that intuitively. When we're eating right, we feel energized. We feel good and ready to go. And I'll explain a little bit more about actually how that energy gets into our brains. Good nutrition supplies critical nutrients. And what do I mean by that? That includes things that you've heard of: vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, fiber, phytochemicals, of which they have not all been discovered yet, but they all do good things for your whole body and for your brain. Good nutrition hydrates and detoxifies. So I'll talk a little bit more about this because people are always asking how much water they should drink. And the rule of thumb, it's a rule of thumb, so it's kind of crude, but approximately half your weight in ounces per day is what you should be looking at for hydration. And again, intuitively, water flushes things out and cleans them, and it does the same thing in your body. Poor nutrition does a few things. It destabilizes blood sugar. So what do I mean by that, and how does that affect your brain? Well, what can happen is that your brain can become what's called insulin resistant. Insulin, and I'm going to talk more about this, is actually a transport system that brings glucose into our cells where it's then converted to energy. So this is now connected. You can see if our blood sugar is destabilized, we don't get the energy that's provided to us by good nutrition. Poor nutrition creates inflammation. So you can see inside the word inflammation, the word flame. It's literally as though our brains and our bodies are on fire. So inflammation, we're all familiar with this, because if you've ever had, and everybody has, a bee sting or a mosquito bite or cut yourself, the area will become red and inflamed and kind of puffy and swollen and sore. But that is localized and temporary, and it's actually a healing mechanism. Your body is doing those things to heal itself back to where it started, to good health. What happens is sometimes inflammation can run rampant and become systemic. It's literally throughout our entire body, and it's chronic. So it's ongoing and it's all over the place, and that's not what we want, and that will eventually affect our brains. They're actually literally on fire. Poor nutrition damages what we call the microbiome. And some of you may be familiar with this term. It's kind of a hot buzzword now. Some of you might not. So the microbiome is a one-cell thick mucosal wall or barrier or layer that lines our entire intestine. And when we talk about the gut wall, this is what we're talking about. We want this to maintain the integrity of a wall. We do not want it to become compromised. You can kind of think of it as a picket fence versus a wall, and you want a wall. So this is also a very important part of our immune system. And what happens is if the microbiome becomes damaged, food particles and things that we eat can get disseminated through the pores of this wall now, and our body reacts against that, and it creates more inflammation. Poor nutrition creates fatigue, fogginess, and depression. And again, these are all linked. So if you think of the body not getting the energy it needs because it's insulin resistant, well, then you're going to feel what? Tired, foggy, and you may experience symptoms of what you think are depression, and it might be, but it also might be that your blood sugar is what we call crashing. Poor nutrition builds up what we call our toxic load or body burden. And what do I mean by this? This is the cumulative toxic effect in the environment of your body of too much junk food, too much restaurant food, too much processed food, alcohol, for some examples. It's as though you haven't changed the filter in the oil filter in your car, and what happens? It gets clogged. So the same thing can kind of happen in your body, and you again have this experience of fogginess or clogginess, if you will. So now we'll take a look at a case study here. This is Anne. Meet Anne. Anne had, unfortunately, 2 strokes that led to partial paralysis and inability to speak. She could recognize nobody, and she was given a diagnosis of terminal dementia and was put on hospice with 2 weeks to live. Her son was a nutritional microbiologist, and instead of giving her an IV fluid, he instead juiced fresh vegetables and fruits and gave her smoothies and fresh juices, blended nuts and seeds for good fats and good oils, omega-3 fats and oils, all included in that, and then eliminated gluten, dairy, and sugar. So gluten is the sticky substance that allows what was a grain to hold together, to be stuck together in something like bread, right? How does bread stick together? It's got a substance called gluten in there, which can also wear down the microbiome. Same with dairy, same with sugar. So what you remove from the diet is as important as what you include. So we have both elements of that here. He also provided excellent what? Excellent hydration. The outcome was that after 3 months, hospice left. So Anne failed hospice, which is something you want to do. And a year later, Anne could speak and joke, walk with some assistance, and cook. And she lived for another 4 years and did not die from the dementia she was originally diagnosed with when she was given 2 years to live. Okay, so that's a little bit about how well this can go if you find yourself in a bad situation. Now we're going to try to prevent that from ever happening to anybody to begin with. So what do I mean, or what do we mean when we talk about brain boosting nutrition? So the brain is actually made from fat and cholesterol, right? That's an interesting concept. So we're always trying to control our fats. Maybe it's about the right fats and having the right level of cholesterol, as opposed to thinking all fat is bad, which came out, that was part of the nutritional guidelines back in like the 70s and 80s. So here I want to talk a little bit about why the good fats are important based on some of the other things that I already mentioned. So what the insulin does, here I want everybody, if you can either watch me do this or maybe do it yourself so you have this kind of visceral experience, you'll really see what I'm saying. If you take one of your hands and you make a flat plane here, come on guys, a couple of you I know can do this, make a flat plane. This is the insulin. Insulin is like a train or a ferry boat system, a ferry system. And the glucose molecule rides on this train and it enters my cell. So here's my cell. And it should go smoothly into my cell and it drops the drops the glucose off over on the other side in my cell, and it can now be used for energy. But what happens if this is sticky? It's sticky. It's as though you're putting your key into the ignition of your car back in the days when we did that, right? And somebody put chewed gum in the ignition. Well, you can't get it in there. It's sticky and it's opaque and it's not what we want. So everything is stuck up in this glucose now that's supposed to smoothly slide into the cell where my body can use it as energy, is now stuck here and it piles up in my body. And what happens when glucose piles up in my body? I get diabetes perhaps. And that's why Alzheimer's is sometimes called type 3 diabetes. So if I'm eating good fats, the opposite is true. And here you see some of those. Walnuts and almonds, what we call the smash fish for short, salmon, mackerel, anchovy, sardines, I had them for lunch, herring, avocado, I usually have one with my breakfast, and then these seeds like flax and pumpkin and chia seeds, coconut oil, I'm going around the circle this way, olives and olive oil. All of those things lubricate the cell wall, so when the insulin comes in with the glucose on it, it can easily enter and do its job. So this is super important. I can't emphasize this enough. This is really key here. We didn't know about this in the old days. We just thought fat was fat. Now we know there are many different kinds of fat. Brain boosting nutrition, as I mentioned before, when we were talking about Anne, I said what you add is as important as what you avoid. So here, what we're saying is limit consumption of what we call simple carbohydrates. You also may have heard them called refined carbohydrates. This is what's in processed food. It's sugar. It's anything made with white flour that makes the grain refined. So it's, pasta, pizza, and pie. It's cookies, cakes, muffins, all of those things that come in boxes that have many ingredients on them. Also genetically modified organisms. Those are hybridized and engineered in a lab to be something different other than what nature intended. So all flour is refined and processed, something to think about. So in terms of kind of remembering this slide and burrowing it into your brain, I like to say, let's look at these pictures and say, if I was going to be offered those three foods, I would not want them. And why not? Well, I have a little mnemonic for that, something that helps me remember. And I call it BIM, B-I-M. Blood sugar, inflammation, and microbiome. These foods will raise my blood sugar unfavorably, too fast, too far. They will cause inflammation, and they will damage my microbiome, which in turn is not good for my immune system or the absorption of nutrients. So I go, you know what? I don't think so. So it's not a matter of willpower or cravings. It's that those things are not going to do it for me. So I have no problem walking away. But that's a little, if you want to think BIM and will those work or won't they? Okay. So brain boosting nutrition improves vitamin, mineral, and nutrient intake, including, we're suggesting, eating some seaweed for micronutrients. Again, we're trying to suggest things that are not obvious, right? So what do I mean by seaweed? If you've ever had sushi and you've had that brown paper that's wrapped around the sushi, that's nori. That is a sea vegetable, one of many. Some other ones are wakame and arame, and they all have wonderful micronutrients, which are small minerals that are difficult to get otherwise in our diets. Iodine in particular is what you'll find in seaweed, and that supports your thyroid. So you can what I like to do is, now I'm going to have my turkey and avocado instead of on bread. My new sandwich is to take a piece of nori out of the package it comes in, wrap my turkey and avocado and kind of cut it on a diagonal and stack it like this. It's very elegant. You can put it in tin foil and take it to the beach, or maybe not tin foil, put it in a container and take it to the beach. I've done that too. So, just thinking about things a little differently. If I need to have handheld food, I can still do that and still boost my brain nutrition. You also want to have copious quantities of vegetables and fruits, preferably organic. You may want to get tested for certain nutrient deficiencies like D3 and B12. Talk to your doctor about that. And you may want to look at doing some supplementation. Eliminate artificial flavors, colors, sweeteners, preservatives. Two issues here. One, these do not support the microbiome. Two, they also send a hunger signal because they're not real food. So if you're eating things that are flavored in this way, your body gets a false sense that it was nourished when in fact it wasn't. So the hunger signal continues while you have already taken in these calories from these types of foods. So it's kind of it's not a healthy arrangement is how I'll put it, because you'll continue to kind of overeat and keep eating when you already ate. The only problem is the definition of eating is interpreted differently by your body. Hydrate for cellular health and detoxification. So again, what you are looking at is approximately half your weight in ounces of water per day. If you're a crazy exerciser or a big exerciser and it's hot out, you'll want more than that. If you're relatively sedentary and it's the middle of winter, you maybe can have a little bit less. Also, I like to make the point that the water that's contained in vegetables and fruits counts, except we can't count it. So you kind of have to just drink your water anyway and know that you're getting a little extra from your vegetables and fruits. I'd like to make the recommendation that we all hydrate by what I call consistent, persistent hydration. Consistent, right? So you start the day with you can have, a big glass of water to start your day, even up to 16 ounces, maybe with some lemon squeezed in there. Your body will really absorb that quickly because you're relatively dehydrated from not drinking all night, and then have little bits throughout the rest of the day. I'm not looking to create discomfort or bathroom emergencies, and that's how you do it. You can do it in a very comfortable way. You don't have to be intimidated by this idea. Lastly, minimize pesticides and herbicides, and I'm going to now discuss an easy way to conceptualize how to do that. This is the EWG'S, what we call the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15. The EWG is the Environmental Working Group. It's actually part of Consumer Reports. And this list is updated all the time. So you can go to EWG.org, and on the top half of this slide, you'll see the foods that are most, what I'll call, contaminated with the most pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides. So these are the ones that if you're going to, if you're going to budget, you want to probably budget to eat these organic. If you're not going to buy just everything organic, then here are the places to concentrate those dollars. The Clean 15 on the bottom half of the slide is the other side of the world. Here's where it doesn't matter quite as much that you buy organic, because these fruits and vegetables tend to be grown without as much chemical treatment. You can even see that certain of these, like avocados, pineapples, cantaloupe down there at number 10, and honeydew at number 14, these tend to be thick-skinned fruits and vegetables, and the chemicals are just less absorbed by them anyway. So that's a good thing. I'm going to throw it back to Lisa now, who's going to talk about toxins.
Thank you, Nancy. So I want to tell another story here about Paul Barton. Paul's mother had died of dementia after a 10-year decline. So when he started showing symptoms of memory loss, he decided not to go to the doctor. But what he did decide to do was read. Now, Paul had never finished high school, but he studied biology, went to the library, took out books on chemistry, and really tried to educate himself. One day when he was reading in the afternoon, he realized he was totally disoriented. He was reading the same paragraph 2-3 times. And he started to think back to what he had done that day. And the one thing that he thought was a little different is that he had had frozen custard. So that's like Carvel, or it could have been Dairy Queen, but something in that neighborhood. And so he started researching what this frozen custard was made of. And one of the things is like Nancy was just talking about, artificial flavors, colors, sweeteners. It's an artificial flavoring called vanillin. And vanillin is made through a petrochemical process. So there's some people who have a hard time detoxifying from metals and from products that undergo this kind of processing. And so he cut these types of foods totally out of his diet. And he went on to write a book about his findings called Alzheimer's Unmasked. He lives in Dallas with his family. And, you know, here he is now, I think at the ripe old age of close to 85, and he's doing well. So here's a situation where he was able to prevent the kind of memory loss that his mother unfortunately had gone through. So we want to talk about neurotoxins. And what is a neurotoxin? So neuro meaning nerve or nervous system. These are anything that impact the nervous system adversely in a bad way. Nancy's already spoken about you know, foods containing pesticides and herbicides, aspartame, flavors and colors, biphenyl BPAs that are in cans, that are in the lining of the can. Many cans today say they don't contain BPAs because we know that these things can be toxic for our bodies and then ultimately for our brains. And there has been a lot of research done linking these kinds of non-foods, but chemicals and other substances to dementia. We also inhale these neurotoxins. Every time you walk past an idling truck and you take in that air pollution, your liver has to detoxify that. When we use household cleaners that have the skull and crossbones on the back because they are irritants and they are toxic, again, whatever we inhale, including these nice smelling air fresheners, they're really chemicals. And again, these things have to go through a filtration system in our body. It taxes our liver. The more you're exposed to these things, the more your liver is taxed, and ultimately you may start to have health issues. The other way we take in neurotoxins is that we can absorb them if we put products on our skin that contain chemicals. And you'd be surprised how many of our personal care products, whether it's shampoos, lotions, cosmetics, you know, most people, when they were leaving the house to go to work, were putting on upwards of 12 to 15 products. If you really think about everything that your body comes into contact with before you leave the house, it's a lot of times it is many of these products. So we're just trying to make you aware of how you might be exposing yourself without even really knowing. Another toxin that you really can't see and you often can't feel, but you might feel the effects of, are our electronics, which put out electromagnetic frequency. And what do they do to the body? Nancy has talked about inflammation. They also increase our oxidative stress. That ages that's like rust. It's aging our body, these free radicals that then have to be absorbed and neutralized. So again, going back to Nancy's discussion of we're going to talk a little more about this, but the toxic body burden all these things just add up. They're cumulative. We also talked about the health of your microbiome. So electromagnetic and magnetic frequency, it could be your computer, your cell phone, the wires that you might be or living or driving near, when your radio starts to buzz, if you're near train tracks or those high voltage wires, you want to try to avoid those as much as you can. All of these things are impacting us, even though we may not feel it at the time. Often people who spend a lot of time in front of screens have a hard time falling asleep at night. And it's because they suppress these products, they suppress the production of melatonin. So melatonin as a supplement, people often will ask about that because it can be helpful. It's natural. It can be helpful. Our bodies make it. We want to allow our bodies to operate naturally. So if we get off of electronics a little sooner, maybe a couple hours before bed, it's not going to impact your melatonin as much, and you'll get better sleep. The other thing EMFs do, they increase your blood pressure, your glucose levels, and they lead to cardiovascular issues. I would also tell you that they do many other things. The research is showing they impact fertility, but we don't have time to go into that today. But this is an area where you're going to see a lot more research in the future. But you're hearing it from us today that this is definitely something to be concerned about. And brain tumors, both in children and adults, are on the rise. We also have people we know who used to carry cell phones in a pocket or next to their skin, like in a waistband. And over time, those can actually cause skin rashes or, inflammation on the skin. So again, just something to be aware of. If you're carrying a cell phone, try not to carry it on your body, but like in a bag next to your body. So I won't spend a lot of time on this because we've talked about it, but you get exposures from a lot of places. It creates this toxic body burden. And the more you expose the body to all of these things, the harder it has to work. And over time, it leads to health issues, including memory problems, but lots of other health issues, as you can imagine.
So when you're looking for causes of memory loss, you really have to look at the whole picture. You have to look at everything. So you can see, even embedded within each one of the two causes that Lisa and I focused on tonight, you have everything from insulin resistance and microbiome to herbicides and pesticides. That's just within nutrition. And then within toxins, you have exogenous and endogenous ones. You have outside of yourself and inside of yourself, and lots of things to consider. And we listed the 10 in the beginning. So most people with dementia have more than one cause. Occasionally they'll have one cause, but most of the time it will be multi-causal, and therefore require a multi-therapeutic approach. And that's what we've kind of given you a taste for tonight. It's as though each person has their own personal tipping point. And so there are things that you can do to protect yourself, like Lisa talked about when she went through the 10 causes. And the one cause where we said social interaction, physical activity, what was the other one that's in there? And intellectual stimulation. All of those three together can be very protective, as can good nutrition. So then if you have a toxic exposure, you may be able to withstand it better than somebody who has all of these things going on at once. They had a Lyme exposure, a root canal, mercury in their teeth, poor nutrition, and toxin exposure. Now it's hard to kind of unpeel all the layers. So you keep going until you get to that tipping point where you're feeling better. And that's what we said has encouraged us so much to do this work, because we've seen that people have been able to do this and have restored their memories, sometimes even after they become diagnosed, which is exciting. So this is one of my all-time favorite slides. Here's the big news flash for tonight. Most of us on this call are going to live until we're 100 or older. Yes, you heard it here. It's really true though. So conventional medicine, modern medicine, Western medicine, whatever you'd like to call it, has the capability, they have enough pills and surgeries to keep most of us alive until we're 100. But as you can see from the difference between the green line, where let's say everyone's there together at 80, hopefully, or late 70s, feeling pretty good. And then you've got the red line where it says, what does it look like from 80 to 100? What does my life look like? Now look over here on the left side on the other axis, the vertical axis. What is the functioning of my cognition? How am I doing physically? How strong am I? Can I walk? Can I bend over and touch my toes? What is my tolerance for stress? And very importantly, do I have purpose in my life and support from people around me? So that's the part you want to hang on to and really nourish, so that when you go from 80 to 104, which is how old I think you can easily live to healthfully, that's the difference between health span and lifespan. It's just not about longevity.
So we just wanted to tell you, Sharpen Again naturally started out solely as an educational nonprofit. And in the last year or so, with the help of a lot of our board members, some of whom were health coaches, we decided that it was as important to educate, that we wanted to help people put into practice the education that we were providing. And so these are some of our newer programs that we just wanted to let you know about. So these webinars, we will do a series of them. There's another one next week. We'll probably do another one later this fall. And the webinars are here to tell you about the causes and just make you aware of how you might be exposing yourself, and also potentially what you could do to stay sharp for longer. On October 6th, we're starting our first small group program. It's only 8 people with a health coach who get educated about some of the causes, but as importantly, people are working on their own personal goals to improve their brains, their minds, their memories, and their bodies, because let's face it, everything is connected. If you're taking care of your body, it will take care of your brain, and vice versa. And then lastly, we've also started individual one-on-one health coaching for people who really need help and want to work individually with a health coach on their particular goals. So what can you do? I have mentioned our website, sharpagain.org. We have a lot of great information there. And, you can get more information on the programs that I just mentioned there. If you know someone who you think would benefit, even from our webinars, we hope you've enjoyed this one. You can refer them to the next one. And we hope that you will also support Sharpen Again naturally, so that we can continue offering these programs. And you can always make a donation on our website. So what we would like to do now is open this up to questions. We put our email addresses there as well on this slide, so that you will be able to contact us if you've got questions. Our address is on the bottom, and on our website. So everything should be there. We want to thank you for tuning in tonight, and we will now open the floor for questions. So Sue Lynn, our executive director, is monitoring the questions, and I'm going to stop sharing, and we'll see what kind of questions people have.
So I had put a note up asking anyone with questions to type them please into the group chat, and we will take a look at them and see if we can answer them. And while we're waiting for people to type in, I actually had a question about fragrances. Is there a difference between natural fragrances versus chemical fragrances in the products that we use, or should we try to be avoiding them altogether?
I mean, that's a good question, because under that category would come things like perfumes um, and aftershaves and all that sort of thing. So the first thing I think Nancy and I would always say is look at the label and see what is in some of these products. Are they chemicals that you don't recognize? Are there dyes that are changing the color of the substance, whatever it is? Are they using natural? I mean, you'll see a lot of times today, they're using natural oils and extracts from plants. Very, very common now. So there is a choice. I mean, a lot of times we get attached to certain fragrances, and if you use them once in a while, if you're going out, special, and you want to spritz yourself up, great. But it's the kind of, again, like unrelenting, you have a plug-in air freshener that is wafting out chemicals night and day in your internal environment. And let's face it, we're all home a lot more these days. That's toxic. It's not great for us.
Thank you.
Agreed.
Jeff has a question. He uses Dulce, DULCE flakes on his salads. Wants to know if that is a good source of relevant minerals.
The answer is
yeah.
Yes. Go ahead.
Yeah, the answer is yes. Dulce is great for you. It's a sea vegetable, like I talked about, and it has many micronutrients and minerals that are otherwise very hard to get in the diet. So Dulce is a home run. I put that in my smoothies all the time.
It's really good. Nancy mentioned that seaweed is good because of the minerals that are in it, and also good for the thyroid. Right. A lot of times people develop thyroid problems as they get older because they don't have any, any of that iodine and you don't get too much of it, but you get enough to keep the thyroid healthy.
Ranjit would like to know how our small group sessions are different from these webinars.
Good question.
Very good question. So I think most important, it's a forum. It's an open group where people support one another, as well as working with a health coach who is part of Sharp Again Naturally and who has a great education about brain health and what contributes to brain health. The other thing that the small groups do is there are guest speakers who will talk in detail on a particular cause and answer questions. So these could be doctors or dentists or health coaches that are specializing in these areas. And lastly, each participant is working on their own particular health goals, because what we know as health coaches is that everyone is different, and not just because of their preferences, about diet and things, but biologically, genetically, we're all different. And so people are going to have different goals. Someone, let's say, may have a lot of silver fillings, and so may want to get a heavy metals test and look into that. Maybe go see a biologically, a dentist.
Dentist, yeah.
Yeah, who's very well versed in heavy metals and what might be problematic. And then someone else may know they've perhaps had a thyroid issue all their lives, or they're not sleeping well, which is a very, very big problem. And so that may be the thing that they want to focus on. So they'll be able to do that in the small group.
But Lisa, also the small group is a series. It's not
Right.
one set.
Right. It's 8 sessions.
Right. That's the biggest difference, and the people get to know each other, and it's limited to a certain number of people.
Right. And it's confidential, and people have access to, only the people in the group have access to that material and those recordings.
Right.
So Jeff asks a question about people who eat primarily plant-based diets. He says the only exceptions for him are the occasional salmon and eggs. And how do you feel about that diet overall, a plant-based diet? And what do you think he might be missing out on with a diet like that?
Nancy, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, sure. So Lisa just alluded to, or actually I think pretty expressly said, that each person is a bio individual. So it would be hard for me to kind of know exactly what is going on with Jeff without knowing Jeff, is how I'm going to put this. So the diet sounds great. I mean, a mostly plant-based diet is good for everybody. So if you're eating copious quantities of vegetables and fruits, and it sounds like you've got some healthy fats in there, it sounds good. Whether or not you're missing anything for you, I don't know, because I don't know you, and I'd also have to have you do certain tests with your doctor to make sure that that was in fact working for you and that there weren't things that were missing. But it certainly sounds like a great diet. The other thing is when you say plant-based, that means absence of animals, and that may or may not include things like grains and beans. So if you do a paleo or a keto diet that some people here may have heard of, you're not going to have grains and beans. The issue with grains and beans, while there's good things about them because they have a lot of fiber and protein, and they soluble and insoluble fiber, they're good for you. They're very high in carb also. So if you are an athlete, you can burn through a lot of that carb and that glucose that I spoke about. If you're more sedentary, then you're less likely to burn that off, and you'll want to be more burning fat than carb. So it will depend upon your activity level and who you are and what your health goals are. But what you're doing and even what you do on a day-to-day basis will vary. So that's where it gets into a little bit of a gray area. If you're talking vegetables and fruit, like mostly vegetables, that's great for everybody. Whether or not you do beans and grains, that's a little bit more open to interpretation based on your individual blood work and your goals.
Thank you. Marietta would like to know, and I'm going to ask Lisa this question. Are we reaching out to the medical profession and to primary nurse practitioners to educate them concerning their patients' cognitive health and medication side effects?
So yes, I mean, I speak to groups of healthcare practitioners through different organizations. Most of them, though, I will say, many of them are already predisposed to looking at the body from an integrative or a functional medicine perspective, meaning looking at the body as a set of systems that all interrelate. The traditional medical community, doctors who come out of our medical schools, let's say here in the United States, who don't go on for any additional training, often don't know about a lot of these causes and how to treat them. Like when you look at the way to detoxify, for example, that's not something that they've been taught in medical school. They may have had 4 hours of nutrition. They may not know how to help their patients with prolonged stress. So, I mean, those are just some examples. They don't, maybe the only thing they really know how to do for sleep is to write a prescription. Mm-hmm. So part of the issue is having, groups of medical practitioners who are open to hearing the information. And we consistently try to, and we have in the more recent past spoken to more of these groups. But Nancy and I have both had experiences personally talking to neurologists who either don't want to hear anything about the kinds of things we know and answer our questions, or who say, oh, I've heard of that, but I don't think it's going to do any good. They just sort of dismiss it out of hand. And I think it's for these reasons that we've talked about. So yes, we are continuing to try to speak to groups, to break down barriers, to open them up, to even working with health coaches to try to make their lives easier by helping their patients be successful with the doctor's recommendations. that can be challenging for people. If a doctor says, we want you to go on a low-fat diet, they often don't know where to start.
Thank
So,
you.
Sure.
Vicky Marie asked a question, and I'm going to direct it to you, Nancy. My recent labs reveal that I am low in sodium. How can I increase my blood sodium?
Again, this is getting into a place where you should probably just talk about this with your doctor and see if they think that you should, be eating more salt, or you can talk about the possibility of salt pills with your doctor.
Thank you. One question that I can answer, Debbie would like to know if the small groups take place on Zoom, and yes, they do. It's a format very similar to this one. And I think that about does it for our questions. If anyone has any additional questions, you can certainly email us at info@sharpagain.org, and we'll be happy to try and answer them for you. And Lisa, Nancy, anything else you'd like to say before?
I want to thank everyone for tuning in. Next Thursday, we're going to be talking about some different topics like supplements and what do we talk? Stress, I think, and one other exercise, right? So we have some other things coming up, and we're gonna try to continue doing these free webinars because I think the information is so important, and we're really here as a resource to help. So please feel free to get in touch with us.
Yeah, we will be sending out an e-blast about registration for the next event. So we will send you the link at that time, but you can also go on to sharpagain.org right now and look under our resources and programs tab. You can register right there. We just received a question at the very last minute. Thank you, everyone. We will be sending out a link to the recording and some very nice compliments, and they are very much appreciated.
Thank you, everyone.
You.
It's great to be with you all. Till next time.